Do not judge. What did Jesus mean by that? The Sermon on the Mount series continues. Hi, welcome to today's little lesson, and thank you so very much once again for joining me on our journey through the Sermon on the Mount, Matthew chapter 5, 6, and 7. And we're just now, finally, after 25 little lessons, this being the 26th, now breaking into the final chapter, Matthew 7, of the Sermon on the Mount, which Jesus says something that's very familiar to lots of people, but probably misunderstood or misapplied by, I don't know if say the majority of those people, but maybe. Okay, and it's found in Matthew chapter 7 and verse number 1. Jesus said, "Do not judge so that you will not be judged." Okay, so that's very plain. Jesus does not want us to judge. And there could be a negative repercussion of our judging in that we would be judged. And it's a little bit vague. What's he talking about there? And so that's what we want to unpack in this little lesson. And I think you're going to be blessed by it, okay? So Jesus elaborates on the warning part, the consequence part of that warning. The consequence is you might be judged. And now the elaboration is found in verse number 2. For in the way that you judge, you will be judged. And by your standard of measure, it will be measured to you. All right, that's pretty good and worth pondering a little bit. If we judge, we might be judged. Now, who might judge us if we judge? Well, it could be other people judging us, or it could be referring to God judging us, because we know that God does judge people. He passes judgment on people. That is, he, makes appraisals of people, who's right and who's wrong, who's righteous, who's unrighteous, who's wicked, who's good, right? God has that capability and right to judge everybody because he knows everything about everybody. And that's one of the reasons that we need to be very cautious in making any kind of a judgment. Not being divine, not knowing all the facts, we are apt to wrongly judge. And that's why, thank goodness, that many countries have some kind of a court system whereby two parties that are at odds with each other can present their side between hopefully an unbiased judge or jury and have the help of professional attorneys who will help them present all the facts so that the judge or the jury that's going to make a judgment can make a righteous judgment. Okay, and we all know that that's an imperfect system because of the imperfections of people. Sometimes judges, for example, unrighteously themselves don't allow evidence to be introduced into a case that's very relevant, but they say that's not relevant, to this case or something. And yet God, who's the perfect judge, takes everything into consideration. He even knows what people were thinking when they did what they did, and he knows the motivation in their heart. And so he can make perfect judgment. It's not easy for us to make perfect judgment. So that's a part of what Jesus is saying, but yet there's a lot more to it. And if our understanding of what Jesus is saying here, do not judge, lest you be judged, is that simplistic that we would never make a moral appraisal of any other person, then we are very, very lacking of a true understanding of what Jesus is actually saying. Because let's face it, within seconds, Jesus is saying, don't give what is holy to dogs and don't throw your pearls before swine. He's not talking about literally giving something that's holy to a literal dog or literally throwing a literal pearl before a pig. He's talking about people who don't value or appreciate what you're giving them. And so obviously you have to make a moral appraisal of people to determine whether or not they are actual, as it were, dogs or pigs before whom you should not give anything holy to them. Okay? Well, how are you going to make that appraisal? Well, you have to gather some evidence, right? You know, I always say, if you want to know if someone's a spiritual pig, throw one pearl. See what they do with the first pearl. And if they tramp on that one, well, you're not under any obligation. In fact, you're actually foolish to share any other pearls with them because they didn't value the first pearl. So they're a pig. Okay, but in order to make that appraisal, because by looking at a person, you can't tell anything about what's in their heart. Are they going to be receptive to the gospel or not? You have to give them a chance to reveal. All right, so back to what we're talking about here. Do not judge lest you be judged. Well, I would submit to you that it's true that when we pass judgment, we set ourselves up to be judged, which is not, not necessarily a bad thing, but it's a situation to proceed with caution because we're going to be judged. First of all, God is going to judge us whether or not our judgment is true or not. If we're passing judgment against someone wrongly, for example, we wind up slandering them, that is spreading a lie about them and defaming their character in some public fashion, well, we open ourselves up to be judged by God because we've just sinned. And God, disciplines people who sin. Or you could use the stronger word, punishes people who sin. So cautious. And then also, as Jesus said, by your standard of measure, it'll be measured you. That's true not only with God judging us when we pass judgment, but that's true of others. Because when we set a standard for other people and we say, well, they're not meeting this standard, well, then people, of course, make the assumption, well, therefore you hold yourself to that standard as well, right? Because you'd be a hypocrite otherwise to condemn somebody else for what you're guilty of yourself. When we judge others and criticize or condemn them for what they're doing, and yet we're guilty of the same or greater flaws or sins or infractions, then, that's a horrible thing because we have actually, we're actually hypocrites. We're pretending to be something we're not. I have the right to criticize you because I'm free of guilt concerning what I'm criticizing you about. Okay, so that's what Jesus is saying, and he elaborates on that. So judging, when Jesus says do not judge, it's not a carte blanche prohibition against making a moral appraisal. We're going to see that more as we go on here. Look, he used this funny analogy, which it's lost its humor over the last 2,000 years, but no doubt it had to be hilarious the first time he said it. Why do you look at the speck that is in your brother's eye, but do not notice the log that is in your own eye? That's not just condemning someone for something of which we are equally guilty. That's condemning someone for something of which we are even more guilty of that thing we're condemning them for, or something else in some other category. See, again, the critic is stepping out onto dangerous ground because even though he might not be guilty or she not be guilty of what he or she condemns in this other person, he might be guilty of, much greater moral infractions. Let's take, for example, a murderer who is not a thief. Well, if he condemns the thief for stealing, but he's a murderer, what right do you have to condemn somebody, for being a thief, for crying out loud? You're a murderer. Yes, thievery is wrong, but, murder is more wrong. And you're condemning that person. So that's why God has a right to be a judge of everyone, because he is perfect. He's not guilty of anything, and he knows everything. We are not in that position. We don't know everything. We don't know what people were thinking. We didn't see everything that transpired. Sometimes people will just find a snippet of evidence and say, there, you're guilty of that, but they don't understand everything that took place before that. And if we understood that, we'd be much more merciful. In fact, we might identify and say, what you did was completely justifiable in light of everything that preceded it. We're able to make a more righteous judgment. And may I point out to you that this is not the only thing that Jesus said about passing judgment, and to bring balance, because that's what we're always trying to do in little lessons, consider all the context, what the whole scripture says. Here's a verse I pulled out from my notes, John 7 and verse number 24, Jesus Christ, the same guy that said, do not judge. Now he says in John 7:24, do not judge according to appearance. See, you don't have all the evidence, so don't judge according to appearance, but judge with righteous judgment. So that means make sure your judgment is right, and you're going to gather more evidence than just what appears to be the evidence. You have to dig deeper and find out more. You know, this just happened to me. I mean, just recently. And in fact, right before I recorded this video that I'm sharing right now, I had a man call me and apologize to me for passing judgment. And that's exactly what he did. And thank God he came to his senses and apologized, because he said, I'm sorry, I listened to what other people were saying about you. And, you know, these are biased people who are looking to find fault because they don't like my theology. And so they're looking to confirm their hatred, justify their hatred and their mockery and so forth of me. And so they're just looking for things. And so, you know, they've told him all the dirt on me. And I heard about their dirt that they were sharing about me. And so I defended myself. I never named them. Never once did I name them, because I'm trying to walk in love towards them. But publicly defended myself, proving that their accusations were wrong with documented actual facts. And, you know, just defending myself so that if people are going to judge, they have all the facts by which to make the judgment. And he admitted, he says, you know what, I'm so sorry because I listened to them and I never called you to find out if there was more to the story. And he said, I even read your defense of yourself. And they said, see how full of pride this guy is? Because look, all the things he's saying about himself. Well, I didn't never say anything about myself until they falsely accused me. And then I defended myself. Yeah, it made me look good, I guess. But the only reason I did it was defend myself so that people could righteously judge and make an appraisal based upon the actual facts rather than upon what people were saying. But they took my defense and said, see, that there's proof that he's full of pride because he's saying good things about himself. All I was doing was defending myself against their accusations. I mean, you know, wicked people are wicked. And even professing born-again Christians, you know, can be just as wicked, if not more wicked, than the non-professing ones. Okay? So, why do you look at the speck that's in your brother's eye but not notice the log is in your own eye? So now, what does Jesus say? Or he elaborates on that. How can you say to your brother, let me take the speck out of your eye, and behold, the log is in your own eye? That is funny, you know, thinking, hey, you got a speck in your eye there, you know, but I've got this massive log sticking out of my eye. You know, that's how absurd it is for people to judge, make moral appraisals who don't have the right to make the moral appraisal, either on one or two counts. One count is that they don't have all the evidence, so, you know, it's not righteous. Number two, they're very flawed individuals themselves. And, you know, they have no right to find fault with anybody because they're, you know, they got the log. And that's so true of people in the world who are finding fault with other people. That's so true of religious people who are so flawed people. So see, can you see, the only people that have the right to judge righteously, to point out people's faults, are people who don't have the log or even the speck in their eye. So you can only pass judgment righteously unless you really have your act together. And most of us probably have room for improvement, okay? And you know, I'm thinking about these people that were accusing me that, again, this guy apologized for listening to them. And I'm reading their criticism of me. I can't find anything substantive. All they say is, oh, he's full of pride. He's into himself. He exalts himself. He's all these vague things for which there's no evidence or proof. But when they do find something, they jump on it like ugly on a bug. And all these people are such flawed people themselves. Oh my goodness. In many cases, just little, if they are Christians, just baby Christians, just getting started, hardly know anything, and think they know everything, and God bless them. No, right. So anyways, good news, is that somebody who was influenced by them, who is actually a ministry, person in ministry himself, and, God's using him in a lovely way. And he himself was publicly slandering me, not broadcast, but, at least to one individual who I'm aware of, and I know exactly what he said, and I confronted him on it, of course, as Jesus said we're supposed to do. If your brother sins against you, confront him. So I called him and left a message, and just today he got back with me, and he apologized. And so praise the Lord. Every once in a while there are happy endings, okay? So did you say it's wrong to take the speck out of your brother's eye? No, not once you have the log out of your eye. See, how can you say to your brother, let me take the speck out of your eye, and behold, the log is in your own eye? You hypocrite. See, you're pretending to be what you're not, like you have the right to be a judge. First, take the log out of your own eye, and then you'll see clearly to take the speck out of your brother's eye. And probably you're going to see so clear that you're probably going to be very cautious about pointing out those specks, knowing that, oh, I probably have a few specks still in my eye. Okay, and that's why, theologically, biblically, for example, when I will promote a biblical truth or expose something that's false that's being taught, generally speaking, now again, there's a balance to this as well, but generally speaking, I don't blast the names of the false teachers. On occasion, yes. And I'm not even saying that it would be totally wrong in every case, but generally, again, here's a principle, that trying to apply what Jesus is saying here, hey, you don't have to point out the people who are false teachers. Point out what is false teaching and let everyone else then be able to identify who are the false teachers by preaching the truth. Okay. So you be very, very careful. And I have done that on occasion. It's very rare where I will actually call out somebody's name. And, I do that with great hesitation. I'm not sure it's ever right, to be honest with you. I mean, there is biblical precedent, however. Paul called out names of, false people on occasion. But most times he didn't, actually. You read through the book of Galatians, and I don't think anywhere in the book of Galatians does he name the name of anyone who's doing the false teaching. But, he's definitely warning against these false teachers. Okay? All right. So anyways, there's always a balance, always a balance. So there you have it. Now, remember how, as we've been going through the Sermon on the Mount, on several occasions, we've found ourselves segueing over into the epistle of James, which of all the epistles in the New Testament, James, it seems, makes more references to the Sermon on the Mount than anybody else. Again, a lot of principles of holiness and righteousness, in other words, throughout the entire New Testament epistle, the body of letters. But James, it seems like more than anybody else, he's making a direct reference to what Jesus said in this Sermon on the Mount. So here again, we find a little passage in James 4, and it helps us to understand really what Jesus was trying to say. James 4, verse 11, do not speak against one another, brethren. He who speaks against a brother or judges his brother speaks against the law and judges the law. See, you're judging that you're actually above the law, because the law says you shouldn't speak against your brother or judge your brother. And so, but if you are the judge of the law, you're not a doer of the law, but a judge of it. So he's actually taking it to a different level, a higher level. Jesus didn't take it to, where, there's even another level on which we're wrong to be passing judgment unrighteously. Again, either because we don't have enough facts, or because we have the log in our eye, and so forth. We have no moral right to judge. James says, you're actually judging the law that God gave, that you shouldn't do what you're doing. You're judging yourself above the law. There's only one lawgiver, and it's not you. James says there's only one lawgiver and judge, the one who is able to save and destroy. Oh my goodness, he's trying to put the fear of God into us. And if you're listening, he is putting the fear of God into you, okay? There's only one lawgiver. It's not you. There's only one judge. It's not you. And he's the one who's able to save and to destroy. But who are you to judge your neighbor? Well, I think that's a rhetorical question, don't you? I'm nobody. Okay, so this ought to be a reminder on a general sense for us to be less critical of people within our hearts, within our minds, especially with our mouths. And there is a time, okay, to be critical, but we know that there's a difference between constructive criticism and destructive criticism. We've already read in this sermon, actually not in the sermon, we read it during as we studied the sermon. She said, if your brother sins against you, you go to him privately. So you're trying to reconcile, but it's going to be negative, right? You're going to be critical of him. You had to judge him. You sinned against me. I've judged that you've sinned against me. And so I go to you privately. Why? Because that's what love would do. I'm not broadcasting it. I'm not gossiping. I'm not slandering. I'm working for reconciliation. And the best way to do that at first is to be keeping it quiet and private between us two. And this fellow who just apologized to me just an hour or so ago, that's something that he said. I should have come to you. I shouldn't have listened. And I shouldn't have blabbed and repeated what I heard based upon just hearing part of the story from people whose motives are very, very questionable as to why it would be so critical. All right. So hope this has all been helpful for you in your everyday walk as you look at other people. You see something that you're tempted to be critical of. Even have a critical thought, you just ask yourself the question, no, wait a second, do I really have the right to pass judgment, against them? Am I ever guilty of that same thing? That's the funniest thing in the world, when someone criticizes you for something that they're guilty of and you know they're guilty of, because then you immediately say to them, you mean you've never done that? And that often kind of changes it. They change the subject, rather quickly. You've never done that. So we should ask ourselves, have I ever been guilty of that? And even if you're no longer guilty of that, we have to still probably admit, at one time I was guilty of that. So see, that should motivate us to be a little bit more merciful towards them. Yeah, I was like that at one time, but God turned me around. So I'm going to show them mercy and pray that God will turn them around. Okay? And if we go to someone to point out any fault, am I motivated by love, or am I just trying to hurt them? Or get revenge because they hurt me. See, all these things need to be asked. And do I have the moral right? Do I have the log out of my own eye? But once you get the log out of your eye, then you can, there is a place, there is a time where you could say, hey, and you could be gracious. Hey, I used to have that same speck in my eye, but by the grace of God helped me to see it. And I was able to get rid of it, and I noticed you're struggling with that too, and let me encourage you. The Holy Spirit in you is able to help you overcome that, whatever, so you just get more gracious when you have a perspective of what Jesus is telling us to have here, okay? Okay, good stuff, okay? And now, finally, in conclusion, the next verse, I made reference to this, but this is This brings another balance, an aspect of balance. Do not, this is Matthew 7:6, do not give what is holy to dogs. Do not throw your pearls before swine, or they will trample them under their feet and turn and tear you to pieces. So, wow. We have to make a moral appraisal. We have to judge people in order that. In fact, Jesus is going to say later on in this chapter, look out for the false prophets, the wolves in sheep's clothing. You'll know them by their fruits. So you have to do a moral appraisal of people's character by looking at the fruit. We'll talk about that when we come to it. See, so that helps balance out all this. And these folks who are always saying, well, you have no right to judge me. Well, there's more to it than that. Okay. And so, isn't this interesting? This is a beautiful balance, I think, because as Christians, we're taught, and we should be loving, long-suffering, merciful, believing the best, and all that kind of stuff. But there are verses like this that Jesus says, hey, there's pigs and dogs out there, and they not only don't they appreciate what you would want to give them, but they're liable to turn and tear you to pieces. You're in danger if you try to be a blessing to them. So, don't be interacting with them at all. Isn't that interesting? That's actually in the Sermon on the Mount where Jesus said about loving your enemies and all these other things that teach us to be tolerant and merciful and patient and so forth. And then we have verses like this. He says, don't even interact with certain people. They're a waste of your time and they're dangerous. They're actually dangerous people because they can harm or hurt you because you're interacting with them. Stay away. Don't give what is holy to these people. And as I said, and I'll just close on this, you can't judge by appearance. Remember, Jesus said that in John 7:24. Do not judge by appearance. So you can't look at a person and see if they're a spiritual pig or spiritual dog. At least generally speaking. Now, if they have an I Hate Jesus T-shirt on, that reveals something about what's going on in their heart. So, you by that appearance, you can make a judgment. But, just because a person has a beard and has big muscles, that doesn't mean that he's resistant to Jesus, right? And just because there's a sweet old lady who's, holding a cane, that doesn't mean that she's receptive to Jesus. And so we toss up one pearl, and we see if they're interested, how they react, treat that one pearl, and if they seem like they value that pearl, well, then they're not a pig, they're not a dog. But if they don't, you can just move on. Just move on. And actually stay away. That doesn't mean God might not lead you or someone else to try again later, hoping their heart has changed, and give them another chance with one more pearl. Okay. All right. Well, that's all the time we have for today. Thank you so much for joining me. Tomorrow, deeper into the next topic in the Sermon on the Mount. Okay. If you're looking for more biblical teaching, a great place to find it. And I hope you don't think I'm boasting. That all my enemies are going to say, oh, look at that guy. He's telling you to go to his website, Well, God called me, to teach his word, and I've been doing that for decades now, and by goodness, we actually have it on a website. And so if I'm boastful and prideful telling you about that, so be it. I'm actually trying to help you because I got nothing to gain by you going to my website, really. And we've got free books there that you can download, and just lots of teaching on lots of subjects. And people do occasionally write me and say something I said helped them, and they open their eyes to something in the Bible. So that's my reward right there. And I'd love to be a blessing to you. So davidservant.com is the website, or davidservant.org. Either one of those will get you to that place. Okay? All right. You can type something in the search bar and see what pops up. Till next time, may the Lord continue to bless you.